My name is Claire Whitman. I am 31 years old, and tonight I found myself once again sitting at the far end of my family's long mahogany dining table, staring at the flicker of candles and the perfectly carved roast turkey as if none of it belonged to me. Thanksgiving in the Whitman household was always a performance, a stage set, with crystal glasses polished silver, and the same conversations circling endlessly about yachts, clients, and social clubs. But this year, something hung in the air heavier than the smell of cinnamon and nutmeg. My father kept glancing at his phone, his fingers tapping against the stem of his wine glass, the way he always did when he was about to deliver some proclamation meant to shake the room. I sat quietly watching my brother Lucas laugh too loudly at his own joke, already flushed with bourbon before the main course had even been served. My younger sister Sophie angled her phone discreetly to catch the glow of the chandelier above her, rehearsing captions in her head for her followers. My mother smiled the way women do when they have no energy left to argue, her lipstick staining the rim of her glass as she filled it again. And me, well, I had learned to stay silent to let them forget I was there, because invisibility had once been the only power I had. But tonight was different. Tonight, I had a secret folded neatly inside my chest, a truth that had taken me nearly a decade of silence and sacrifice to build. Every word my father was about to say, every smug grin Lucas would offer, every gasp Sophie would dramatize for her feed, I was ready for all of it. Because I knew how this performance would end, and it would not be the way they expected. The meal unfolded with forced cheer. Dishes passed back and forth, polite toast rehearsed out of habit. My father raised his knife against the rim of his glass, the sharp ping slicing through conversation. His voice filled the room, calm but heavy with self-importance. "I have an announcement," he said, pausing just long enough to make sure every eye was on him. "After months of careful negotiation, I've decided it's time. We are selling Whitman Systems. The deal will be finalized tomorrow morning." The silence was instant, then cracked by Lucas choking on his drink. Sophie froze, with her phone half lifted, torn between turning it off and capturing the moment. My mother's hand trembled as she set down her fork, and my father, enjoying the weight of his revelation, delivered the second blow. "And to be clear, none of you will inherit a penny of it. Your mother and I will use what we need for retirement. The rest will fund a foundation in my name. That is the legacy I've chosen." A heat surged through my chest, not the helpless rage I had once known, but something colder, steadier, sharper. I placed my glass down with deliberate care. All eyes turned toward me, the daughter they had dismissed years ago, the one they assumed would fade into the background. My voice was calm, but it carried across the table with the precision of a blade. "Good," I said, "because the buyer you've been negotiating with is me." When I was 22, fresh out of college with a degree in computer science and more determination than common sense, I thought I had finally earned a place at my father's table. I had spent months designing a cloud-based integration system that I believed could transform our family's company, Whitman Systems, from a lumbering dinosaur into a modern competitor. I created diagrams, projections, even a working prototype, and I begged for a chance to present it to the board. Against his instincts, my father finally granted me 10 minutes at the next quarterly meeting, as if he were humoring a child who had been too insistent to ignore. I remember walking into that boardroom with my laptop under my arm, palms sweating, heart pounding, with the kind of nervous excitement that almost feels like hope. The men sitting around the table, most of them old friends of my father, golf partners, or fraternity brothers, turned executives, barely looked at me. Their cufflinks glittered, their smiles were polite but impatient, as though I were a commercial break interrupting the real program. I launched into my pitch anyway, voice steady, despite the storm inside me showing them how our legacy software could integrate with emerging cloud platforms. I spoke about scalability, efficiency, the way we could cut costs and attract younger clients who were already demanding solutions like this. For 10 minutes, I believed they might actually hear me. Then my father sighed, loudly. He glanced at his watch, and with a dismissive flick of his hand, he stopped me mid-sentence. "That's enough, Claire," he said, his smile tight, his tone indulgent. "Creative, sure, but this is the real world. Our clients aren't interested in experiments. They want stability, not your academic projects." The room chuckled softly, the way men do when they're united in superiority. He turned to them with an apologetic shrug. "My daughter has just graduated full of bright ideas. Shall we move on to actual business?" I can still feel the sting of those words. The way my cheeks burned as I packed up my laptop, trying to keep my hands from trembling. The way no one met my eyes. The humiliation was complete. I left that room with my head high, but something inside me had cracked. That night, staring at the ceiling of my childhood bedroom, I promised myself I would never give him the satisfaction of watching me beg again. If he could not see me, then I would make myself impossible to ignore. 2 weeks later, I left Chicago with $5,000 in savings, a second-hand car, and no real plan beyond getting as far away from his shadow as I could. I ended up in San Francisco, in a studio apartment the size of my parents' walk-in closet, surrounded by peeling paint and the constant hum of traffic. The first year nearly broke me. I took freelance coding jobs that barely paid enough to cover rent. I lived on instant noodles and black coffee, sometimes skipping meals so I could afford internet service. My mother called occasionally, her voice careful, as if she were speaking to a distant relative rather than her own daughter. My father never picked up the phone. But in that tiny room with my computer balanced on a wobbly desk I found on the curb, I started building. At first, it was small projects for startup systems that kept them afloat long enough to chase their dreams. Every dollar I made, I reinvested into something bigger. I created a company under the name Rowan Technologies, never attaching my real surname to it. I wanted my success, or my failure, to be mine alone, not another line in the Whitman family ledger. I chose E. Rowan as my professional name, borrowing my middle initial and the street where I rented that cramped studio. No one knew who I was, and that anonymity was liberating. I could fail without an audience, or I could rise without being dismissed before I even spoke. Each late night of coding, each deal closed with nothing but grit and persistence, became another brick in the foundation of the life I was determined to build. My father had silenced me in that boardroom, but I carried every word of his dismissal with me, not as chains, but as fuel. And as the years passed, the fire only grew. Rowan Technologies began as nothing more than a name on a tax form and a dream scrawled across a notebook. But within 3 years, it had taken on a life of its own. I hired my first 2 employees with money I should have used for health insurance, and I signed the lease on a real office in a rundown building in Soma, the kind of place where optimism covered the cracks in the walls. We worked 18-hour days, fueled by vending machine coffee, and the kind of reckless ambition only the desperate can afford. Our breakthrough came when we developed a platform that allowed outdated medical record systems to talk to modern cloud software without tearing the whole infrastructure apart. Hospitals were hungry for solutions, and my little company became the one that could bridge the gap. By the end of year 4, we had contracts with 3 major clinics, and venture capitalists began to circle. I let them circle. I smiled at their offers and refused almost all of them, determined to keep majority control. I had seen too closely what happened when founders gave up their voice. The name E. Rowan became a rumor in the industry, a reclusive founder who avoided cameras, who never gave interviews, who let her COO handle the spotlight while she stayed behind the code. I leaned into that mystery. It gave me freedom to work and build without ever risking discovery by the family I had left behind. To the outside world, I was just a shadow with sharp ideas. To myself, I was finally something more than the girl who had been silenced at her father's table. Year by year, Rowan Technologies grew. We acquired smaller startups that filled the gaps in our services. We reinvested every profit, building a war chest that allowed us to move strategically instead of desperately. By the 8th year, our valuation had climbed over $200 million. My apartment had improved, my wardrobe had upgraded, but I still remembered the feeling of that studio, with its cracked window and drafty heater. I never wanted to forget it because it reminded me of what it cost to start over. For years, I kept my distance from Chicago. I sent polite holiday cards, vague emails about being busy, the occasional phone call when guilt tugged too hard. My father never asked what I was doing. In his mind, I had abandoned the family business, and that meant I was irrelevant. That indifference stung more than his anger ever could have. My mother filled the silence with stories about Lucas's promotions, Sophie's brand deals, the house renovations my father insisted on. They lived as though I were a satellite orbiting too far to matter. But everything changed when Whitman's systems began to stumble. Their software, once cutting edge, had become a relic. Clients drifted away to competitors. The numbers dipped quarter after quarter, even as my brother sat in a corner office he hadn't earned. I saw it happening in the reports. I studied every filing, every industry analysis, every quiet signal that the company was vulnerable. And then I started moving. Rowan Technologies acquired shares in the suppliers that Whitman relied on. We positioned ourselves inside the networks of their largest clients. We waited. 6 months before that fateful Thanksgiving, I had my CFO send an offer, anonymous, professional, clean. An offer to acquire Whitman Systems outright to preserve its name while breathing life into its dying body. My father rejected it without reading past the first page. Pride has always been louder than logic in his world. But the board wasn't blind. They saw the numbers. They felt the decline pressing against their bonuses, their reputations. Quietly, steadily, they began to talk. By the time November arrived, Rowan Technologies, under the mask of Aurora Capital, was the buyer waiting on the other side of the table. The contracts were nearly finalized. The announcement was scheduled. My father believed he was orchestrating the deal, but in truth, I had already signed the papers 48 hours earlier. Still, I knew words on a contract weren't enough. I had carried the weight of invisibility for too long. I needed to see his face when he realized who I was. That was why, after nearly a decade of absence, I packed my bags, boarded a plane to Chicago, and drove through the snow-dusted suburbs to the house I had once called home. The Whitman estate loomed exactly as I remembered, tall columns, glowing windows, the driveway lined with cars for the holiday feast. Inside, laughter and clinking glasses spilled through the doors. I paused on the front steps, my breath hanging in the cold November air, and steadied myself. This was not a return, this was an arrival. And when I stepped inside carrying the secret of who I had become, I knew the performance of Thanksgiving was about to collide with the truth I had built in silence. The Whitman Thanksgiving table had always been a stage, and my father, its director. The mahogany gleamed under the chandelier, the silver polished to a mirror shine. Course after course arrived, but I barely tasted a bite. My father kept checking his phone. I knew why. I had been placed, as always, at the far end of the table. Lucas lounged at his right, Sophie at his left, my mother opposite, already on her second glass of wine. Conversations swirled with yacht stories and brand deals. I cut my turkey, silently waiting. The gratitude ritual came next. Lucas bragged about quarterly numbers and his new yacht. Sophie thanked her 1,000,000 followers. When my turn came, I raised my glass. I'm thankful for rejection, I said evenly. Sometimes it forces you to find your real path. My father frowned, but continued to his usual monologue about legacy. Finally, he tapped his knife against the glass. I have an announcement, he said, standing tall. After months of negotiation, I've decided it's time. We are selling Whitman Systems. Tomorrow, the deal will be finalized. Lucas choked on his drink. What you promised. Sophie gasped, clutching her phone. My father silenced them with a hand. The buyer is Aurora Capital. 50 million. And none of you will inherit a penny. The proceeds will fund my foundation. That is the legacy I've chosen. Chaos erupted. Lucas slammed his fist on the table. Sophie wailed, mascara running. My mother pressed her napkin to her lips. I set down my glass. Who's the buyer, I asked. He puffed his chest. Aurora Capital, sharp investors. They'll take Whitman into the future. Good, I said, because Aurora Capital is me. The silence was absolute. Lucas knocked over his wine. Sophie whispered into her phone. Did my sister just say she owns Aurora? My mother grabbed the bottle, eyes wide. I rose slowly. For 8 years, I've built Rowan Technologies. Under the name E. Rowan, I created a company now worth $200 million. We acquired your suppliers, your clients, and finally, your company. Every deal you thought you controlled, I set in motion. Tomorrow, the press release goes live. Legally, Whitman Systems already belongs to me. My father's face turned crimson. This is a lie. Aurora is run by Rowan, not you. I slid my business card across the table. E. Rowan stands for Elizabeth Rowan Whitman. My name, my company. You dismissed me once, and I built what you refused to see. Lucas shouted, "You spied on us." No, I said calmly. I read the reports you ignored. I used the very plan I pitched at 22. I didn't steal. I bought what you let decay. My father slammed the table. You can't be my daughter and the one who takes my company. Yes, I can, I said. I've always been both. You just refuse to see it. The room dissolved into noise, Lucas raging, Sophie crying, my mother whispering my name. But inside me, there was only clarity. The stage had shifted, and I was finally standing in the center. After the announcement, the dining room fractured like glass under pressure. My father stormed toward his study, slamming the heavy oak doors so hard the chandelier trembled. My mother trailed behind him, her steps unsteady, her face pale. Lucas paced the hallway, with his tie loosened, muttering curses, while Sophie retreated to her room, phone in hand, still broadcasting the family implosion to anyone willing to watch. I remained in my seat, staring at the untouched slices of pie cooling on the table, the candles burning low. I had waited 10 years for that moment, and yet the triumph tasted hollow. A sharp knock rattled my door later that night. Lucas barged into my old bedroom without waiting for an answer. His face was flushed with alcohol and fury. "You think you're clever," he hissed. "Lying to us all these years, hiding behind some fake name." He paced like a cornered animal. "I was the one who stayed, Claire. I was the one who carried this company while you ran off to play coder. I folded my arms. Carried, you bled it dry. You used the credit cards for your nights out, signed off deals you didn't understand, and gambled away money that wasn't yours." He froze. "You can't prove anything." I reached into my desk drawer, sliding a folder across the surface. Bank logs, vendor invoices, transfers to offshore accounts, $300,000 stolen, all traced back to your computer. His face drained of color. For a moment, I thought he might strike me, but his fists only clenched at his sides. "You'd destroy your own brother." I held his gaze. "I'd hold accountable a thief who happens to be my brother. There's a difference." He staggered back, muttering that this wasn't over, then slammed the door behind him. Silence returned, broken only by the soft creak of floorboards outside. My mother appeared in the doorway, her glass finally empty, her eyes red. She slipped inside, closing the door gently behind her. "I should have stopped him," she whispered. "I should have stopped your father all those years ago when he humiliated you. I told myself I was keeping the peace, but I was wrong. I failed you." Her words pierced deeper than Lucas's threats. I had come prepared for anger, denial, even hatred, but not for remorse. My throat tightened, yet I forced myself to answer. "You could have stood up for me. Just once. I needed someone in that room to believe me." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I always believed you. I just didn't know how to fight him. He fills every room. He always has." For the first time in years, I saw my mother not as the polished wife with her glass of Chardonnay, but as a woman who had lived in the long shadow of a man who demanded obedience. She reached for my hand, and though I hesitated, I let her hold it. "Whatever happens tomorrow," she said, "don't forget you are more than what he made you believe." Morning came gray and cold. I dressed in a navy suit, tied my hair back, and walked into the kitchen where Maria silently poured me coffee, her nod more comforting than words. At 7, my father appeared, shoulders stiff, eyes rimmed red from a sleepless night. My study. Now. The walls of his sanctuary were lined with plaques and photos of victories past, none of which bore my face. He sank into his leather chair while I chose not the visitor's seat but the edge of his desk, reversing the power dynamic. My attorneys confirmed the sale is binding, he said bitterly. The board vote unanimous. You outmaneuvered me. Because you underestimated me, I replied. You always did. He studied me for a long moment, anger flickering, then faltering into something more fragile. How did you do it? His voice was quieter now. No family name, no capital, nothing but an idea. How did you build something that big? I told him the truth, the ramen dinners, the endless nights, the prototype born from the very plan he had dismissed. He listened, his jaw tight, his eyes betraying the weight of recognition. Finally, he asked, and me. What happens to me now? I drew a breath. You'll be chairman emeritus. No authority, but a respected seat. An office, a title, a voice if you choose to use it wisely. His shoulders sagged, age settling heavy across him. For the first time in my life, I saw my father not as the towering figure of power, but as an old man grasping at relevance. He nodded once, almost imperceptibly. You've left me no choice. No, I said softly. I've given you a choice. To stand beside me or to be left behind. By morning, the decision was sealed. The contracts had been signed, the board had voted, and at 9 a.m., the press release confirmed what the world now knew: Rowan Technologies had acquired Whitman Systems. My father's empire no longer belonged to him. Sophie confronted me first, her voice shaky. So you're the boss now. What does that make me? It makes you my sister, I said. If you want a role, you'll have to earn it. To my surprise, she didn't scoff. I could help with branding, she admitted. Maybe I could use my platform to tell our story differently. I didn't promise her anything, but I didn't dismiss her either. Lucas hid, too humiliated to face me. He would have to choose repay what he stole and rebuild himself or face exposure. For the first time, the consequences were his to carry. My father called me back into his study. His eyes were rimmed red. My attorneys confirm it, the sale is binding. You outmaneuvered me. Because you underestimated me, I replied. He stared at me for a long moment, the weight of years heavy in his gaze. How did you do it? I told him about the ramen dinners, the endless nights, the prototype born from the plan he had dismissed. He listened silent until finally he asked, and me, what happens to me now? You'll be chairman emeritus, I said. No authority, but respect. An office, a title, a voice if you choose to use it wisely. Something in his shoulders eased, though pride still warred with resignation. You've left me no choice. No. I answered softly. I've given you one. In the months that followed, we all changed. My father surprised me by embracing his advisory role, telling stories to young employees, guiding them with history instead of control. My mother set down her wine glass and began working with a foundation that supported young women in technology. Sophie, to everyone's shock, found a way to channel her followers into meaningful campaigns for our consumer division. Even Lucas, pushed to the edge, enrolled in business school. 6 months later, the name on the building read Whitman Rowan Technologies. My photo hung beside my grandfather's and father's. For the first time, our legacy included me. One evening, reviewing quarterly reports, my father leaned back and said almost reluctantly, "You've done more in a year than I managed in 10. His words loosened something in me I hadn't realized was still bound. Success alone had never been enough. Revenge had fueled me, but reconciliation, messy, imperfect, was what gave it meaning. This Thanksgiving, as candles flickered and plates passed around the same mahogany table, I no longer felt invisible. My family finally saw me, and in that recognition, I found something sweeter than victory. I found peace. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy these family drama and revenge stories, please subscribe and join me for more every day.